Welcome back to another episode of the Sky Society podcast. Today, I am so excited to be chatting with Namita Gupta. She is a marketing and partnerships manager and a fashion entrepreneur. Welcome, Namita.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the Sky Society podcast. Namita is, I think, a perfect example of showcasing how a non-linear career path can still lead you into a place in your career where you are really happy and you don't necessarily need to know what's ahead of you when you're just starting. So she switched from fashion to tech sales to marketing and has done a whole ton. So super excited to get into your story, Namita. But before I jump in, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So for the past 12 years or so, I've been working in the strategic partnership slash brand partnership space where I've kind of been able to work with like a variety of different sized companies, been able to work with a variety of different sized brands across all different verticals. So I would say my main sort of specialty and skill set really is in the idea of being able to exceed and meet revenue goals, and then also make first of its kind partnerships come to life, especially within the culture and creator space. So, sort of like all of these different experiences really led me to create and launch my own fashion brand. And in terms of doing that, that's also propelled me into sort of like not being scared to explore even other career avenues, because I genuinely feel like, to what you just said, career is nonlinear and it's also so long. So, you have all the time in the world to get to all of your passions.
And I think when you're just starting out, you feel like every single decision matters so much more than it actually does. Because then when you're looking back on it, there was so much time for you to make mistakes and adjust and pivot.
100.
And yeah. And I think especially with you, I'm excited to go in and talk more about your fashion brand that you built. Because I think that's a dream that a lot of us have, or I know a lot of women that I talk to that have corporate jobs, they have, something else that they may want to start on their own. I think the hardest part of that is just starting. I think like what you said there is just overcoming that fear from the beginning.
Yeah, totally.
So Namita, can you go ahead and start off by telling me a little bit about how you got started in your career, kind of what it looked like for you after graduating from UCLA?
Yeah, absolutely. So, honestly, like when I graduated from college, I was actually selected in college to be like the one student that had an internship over with Gap. And so for me, fashion was always like a passion of mine. It was also something that I wanted to get into. So post college, I decided like that was going to be the angle that I went after. I also happened to graduate in 2009, which was a really bad year just in terms of the economy and the recession. So I luckily got a job over at Ann Taylor Corporate out in New York City. So that was a really awesome role because it allowed for me to dip my toe into what it meant to be working at a really, really large fashion brand. So learning everything from start to finish, but then at the same time, also learning the nuts and bolts of true business acumen, because everyone in New York, it's a very work hard, play hard work culture. So being able to experience that right out of the gate, I think was really beneficial to just my overall business acumen and just kind of how my work ethic would be transformed from that point onwards.
So
So, oh, go ahead.
you studied economics in college, is that correct?
Yeah, I studied business economics, and honestly, like I always have thought this, but like not to say that I don't think it's necessary to go to college, but I find it to be so crazy how the way the system is set up is that when you go to college, you are, poised with the decision of what do you want to do for the rest of your life. And I just think at age 17, 18, it's really hard to decide that. So yeah, I actually entered UCLA undeclared and then ended up finding economics as something that I just felt would be general enough to be able to touch on all aspects of business.
So this first role where you were at Ann Taylor, you were a merchandise analyst. Can you tell me a little bit about what that role looks like?
Yeah, it was honestly like very analytical, and it was a world in which like we were sort of analyzing what it meant to send proper amounts of inventory to all stores like nationwide. So for me, I was more on like the analyst side for the United States specifically. But for example, like one of the more interesting projects that I had done at Ann Taylor was we were removing the petite store set from a subset of like flagship or larger stores, just to understand like how would removing that petite store set impact overall sales in those stores? Like, is this petite store set something that we should still be prioritizing nationwide or within the US or what have you, or within specific demographics? So it was just interesting to be able to see like how buying behaviors changed from demographic to demographic, from state to state, from store to store. And then also seeing with that whole petite store set analysis, we saw that sales actually dipped in each of those respective stores, which almost verified that, in the spirit of inclusivity, there are women who are petite, there are women who are plus size, and there should be a world in which each store each big store at least offers that size range for all customers. So again, like it was very much so analyzing things from an allocation perspective, also being able to analyze things so that your buyer for your respective categories would know what to buy into based on prior sales. So again, just lots of analytics, lots of numbers, but again, it was like very insightful, and it allowed for me to understand the business from production to actually getting something sold.
That's amazing. That sounds like a very fun job where you just kind of get to like experiment and get to play with numbers. So that is a really cool way to start out just out of college. And I know you said that role was in New York. So was that your first time living in New York?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It was oh my God. I'm so glad that you brought that up actually, because I think after having graduated from college and just being in California, I'm originally from the Bay Area, but after being in LA for 4 years for college, I think coming out of that experience, I really, really wanted to challenge myself and just try something completely new and just throw myself into like a completely different social situation. And that summer prior to me moving, because I moved in January of 2010, I actually visited New York, and there was just something about the city that was so inviting and so electric, and it just encompassed so many of my interests as it related to brands and fashion and nightlife and all the things. And so I remember the January before I moved, I would stay up late to like midnight, 1 a.m., cold emailing all these like big retailers out in New York. So it'd be like the Burberrys, the Gucci's, like the Pradas of the world, like literally getting no responses or just getting a bunch of mailer demon, unsent messages back, because I was literally guessing these people's emails based on the email domains and their first and last names.
Yeah, like doing their name at company name. Yeah.
Exactly. And then finally, a family friend of mine said that he knew someone at Ann Taylor, and then they ended up flying me out there. And it was kind of a surreal experience because a limo actually picked me up from JFK with
oh my gosh.
I know. I was like, what is going on? Like, me out of college in the middle of a recession. This is the last thing that I expected.
In New York.
In New York.
A dream.
Seriously. And then I think what was also quite surprising about the entire thing was the woman who hired me, obviously many, many years older than me. She actually went to my high school. So what are the chances of someone at this large corporation in New York City having gone to the same high school as you? And I grew up in this small suburb in Northern California called Fremont. So I think all these random serendipitous things were just a great sign from the universe that, you're on the right path. Take this job, see what it does for you, see what you learn, and then keep it moving from there.
Wow, that is such a cool way to be introduced to New York and to start your career after college. I am very, very jealous. Mine looked a lot different than that. One thing I want to go back to that you had said, Namita, is you mentioned that you had cold called all of these different C-level executives at all of these huge fashion brands. Did you get responses?
Yeah, I mean, okay, I got some responses, but I will say like there was lots of, again, like no responses, and then very much so like we're just like not hiring right now. Again, like it was the time of the recession. So I think lots of these entry-level roles were being filled, especially by people who had gone to FIT or had gone to fashion school in New York. And for me, again, I went to UCLA, I studied business. I didn't have anything within the fashion realm except for that one internship at Gap, which at least was something. But very much so. I would say like at the time, these larger luxury retailers, especially, were very specific on like who they hired, and like there wasn't as much of a pull for things like diversity and inclusion, where the world now is just a really different place where those are sort of facets that are almost required and something that people champion and really strive to look for. So I would say like the climate was just so different back then, and like I obviously, just being so green out of college, maybe there was a world in which some of my outreach emails rambled on for too long and all that. And so again, it's all such a learning experience, but I would say because I used to do all of that outreach when I was, just out of college, I actually still do that outreach now. And like, I get so many responses now. It's kind of like night and day. Even having this conversation, I haven't even thought about this contrast where when I was, like 22 years old from now, I just turned 36, like how starkly different it is and how far I've actually come. So I would say like the level of cold calling, just reaching out, starting out in your career, I would tell anyone as a piece of advice, like never be afraid to reach out, because slowly but surely you'll gain more and more and more confidence. And because you've already been practicing that skill for so many years, it'll just be something that comes naturally to you, and you won't be afraid to reach out to anyone or even go up to anyone at a networking event.
That's such a great point that you make there. And I love that risk that you took, just, emailing, and it didn't work for you back then when you just graduated, but it sounds like it's working for you now, and that you're able to do these cold pitches and you're able to get responses. Can you share maybe what your email looks like, or tips for like putting together those cold outreach emails so you can get a response?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, like nowadays in my subject line, what I'll write is Namita, and then in parentheses, I'll put the various companies I've worked for that I feel kind of shaped myself in the best way. So I put Namita in parentheses, ex Pinterest, comma, Instagram, comma, Nasty Gal, and then I will, put times and that person's name and where they work for. And so I think that that's already a great subject line, because the reader is interested, like, oh, cool, this person's worked for Pinterest. She's also worked for Meta, Instagram, and also worked for a leading startup back in the day, which was Nasty Gal. So I think for all the brands and folks that I reach out to, it's just a compelling subject line. So number one recommendation is to have a good subject line, so that way someone wants to open that email. And number
What would you, real quick, what would you say for someone who doesn't have, oh, sorry to hit something, thought I dropped my water.
yeah.
What would you say for someone that doesn't have a compelling, or hasn't worked at big names like that? Maybe they're just starting out, or maybe they've worked at companies that are smaller and less known. What can they put in their subject line to stand out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've also oftentimes this is one thing that I always said was, for people that I wanted to speak to, or who, furthermore inspired me, I would write in the email, like, or subject line, like the name of the person and a dash, and like, thank you for being an inspiration. And so I think like even just being able to sort of, share to that person, like, you inspire me, you are someone who I aspire to be, who I admire. I think, at whatever age someone is at in their careers, it's such a nice thing to hear. And it reminds you that you are actually doing a really great job, because all of us, just as humans, are naturally so hard on ourselves. So even like the most successful CMO probably feels as if she or he is failing in some way, shape, or form. So to get these kind notes from admirers is just a confidence boost. It reminds you that the world is a kind place, and that people respect you and are looking at the amazing work that you do. And I feel like, again, in the spirit of just increasing community in this world, which I very much so think we need more of, I think it's just a great gesture. And again, regardless of what response you get or lack of response you get, you tried, you have no regrets, and you just keep it pushing.
I think that subject line is actually gold, because I would definitely, that would play to my ego, and I would open up that email so I could, because I get, people ask me all the time or reach out to me, and I don't respond to a lot because a lot of them seem very templated. But if someone is like, I'm inspired by you, I'd be like, like let me go click in and read why. So I think that's really awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But yeah, take us to your body too. I want to hear what you put in the email as well.
For sure. And so I think for me, of course, like that's, the content of the email has morphed throughout the years. And so I just think, again, it's, you really need to, like, with each email that you send out, be diligent on like figuring out what it is that you want to say. What is at least like one or two things that you like about this person, you admire about them, or something that you feel like they've done really well in the past. Like, let's say it's it's a CMO. Is there a campaign that really inspired you, that you saw, that was featured furthermore, like an ad week or any other publication? If it's someone who's in like the more like finance space, like, are there certain companies that they've worked for that's just like a dream for you to, be a part of, or you just like really like their values or their ethics or whatnot? So I think what I would say is, like, you start off the email, you introduce yourself. I always hyperlink my name such that it leads to my LinkedIn, gives a very like brief intro of why you're reaching out. Like, this is why you inspire me, and this is one line of who I am. And then the meat of the email that I currently send really sort of showcases, this is my perspective on, this is just specifically for brand partnerships. This is my perspective on where I think partnerships are headed and how I think partnerships are the driving force of marketing today. And this is why, and I love your investments in XYZ. And then just kind of ask, like, whether there's a role that you saw, or if it's just a world in which you're trying to get a coffee chat. Ask, like, I would love to pick your brain for like 30 minutes. I know it's a lot to ask, but I super admire you, and let me know if you're interested. And then you sign off your name. And I think, again, in this world that we live in today, I have gotten responses back from women in like the leading VC space who are just like so impressive, from CMOs, from founders of companies, from leaders of like partnerships organizations at like amazing companies like Discord and Patreon, and like even Pinterest. I had reached out to someone years prior to me actually getting a job here. So there is just so many ways in which you can do outreach and how you can get creative. But I think it's always just so important to make the note personalized and to really show that, this is something that would benefit you and why.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible format that people can take and put into action for doing those cold outreach. And even if it doesn't lead to a job, I think it can lead to, like you said, meaningful conversations, connections, people that you may run into in the future, right? You may cold email someone at Pinterest, may not get the job right then, but then a couple of years later when you apply or something changes, they may remember you, and it can always like go in your favor. So I think that it's an incredible habit to have. And I think your approach is really inspiring.
Yeah, no, for sure. And another thing I'll say is just that each experience and each conversation like morphs you into the person that you are. So even if a conversation happens to like go really badly, or you feel like you wasted that person's time, or whatever it is, like, I would say walk into each conversation at least having a few questions, being prepared of what it is that you're trying to accomplish from this convo. But if all else fails, and if the conversation doesn't go as planned, you learn something from it, and you take those learnings and you apply it to the next conversation. So I think everything is like a win or learn. It's just the way you look at it.
So Namita, after your experience at Ann Taylor, you went over to Shoe Dazzle. Can you tell me a little bit about your time there?
Yeah. So actually, when I was living in New York, I had a really good friend of mine who is actually still like one of my best friends. And he was just very involved in the Silicon Beach startup space. Like, he had started his own company from scratch right out of college. And so he just had a really wide network of all these startups that were, like starting out or had like a hot new idea or whatnot. So he actually referred me to Shoe Dazzle because he knew of my interest in the fashion space. And at the time, Shoe Dazzle was the very first e-commerce celebrity-backed company that even existed. And so I ended up speaking with their head of merchandising over the phone. And I actually got hired at Shoe Dazzle over the phone, like no phone screen,
Oh my gosh.
no video chat, no nothing, like just had some great referrals. And then I moved my life back from New York back to LA. And I was just like really excited to like be there in Los Angeles where I had gone to college, and Shoe Dazzle was a really hot and happening company at the time. Had like Kim Kardashian come into the office a few times, Lala Vasquez. Like it was just like very cool to be a part of their like newly formed merchandising team. And I think for me, again, my spirit was always in like that entrepreneurial lens. Like working at Ann Taylor was awesome for getting foundational skills. But then I think being able to go to a startup and like work from scratch, do things from the white space, like was really inspiring and fun. And we just did really, really awesome things, just even in terms of campaigns and initiatives, being able to test and learn, being not afraid to try new things. And nothing was ever perfect, but we tried it, we put it online. And again, it was a different world in 2012, but I loved the idea of testing and learning. And after Shoe Dazzle, after unfortunately that company, that was the first company that I was actually laid off from. We ended up, like when you think about the industry, there was Shoe Dazzle and there was another competitor of ours called Just Fab, and Just Fab ended up sort of like taking the lead within the subscription celebrity shoe space, which then caused Shoe Dazzle to have to do layoffs just because of the way that the company was performing. But after that, I actually had a bunch of executives that had gone over from Shoe Dazzle to Nasty Gal. So I had then got brought over to Nasty Gal, and that was definitely a huge rocket ship. And I think that experience at Nasty Gal really taught me how special it is to be a part of a cult brand, and being able to experience that and see the hyper growth of that company, see how many people were just purely obsessed with the brand, obsessed with the clothes, obsessed with like the brand ethos, and really wanted to be like that cutting edge daredevil girl who kind of marched to the beat of her own drum. I think that really allowed for me to grow a ton of affinity for the marketing space and for the consumer centric space. And also, I always thought to myself, oh my gosh, I would love one day to create my own version of whatever a Nasty Gal is, but for like have some tie to be to like the South Asian space, because I'm also really passionate about my culture. So I think that experience was like so beautiful and so life-changing in so many different ways, just in terms of how I saw the industry. And it was just a really special place to be a part of.
That sounds incredible. And being able to transition from working at a larger fashion company in New York to then going back to LA and working in this startup environment, first at Shoe Dazzle and then going over to Nasty Gal, sounds like a ton of fun as well. But also I'm imagining very different vibes in each of these places. Can you tell me kind of about what the difference was when you're kind of like comparing working at an Ann Taylor versus working at Nasty Gal when it was just a startup for Shoe Dazzle?
Yeah. That's a really great question, Natalie. So I would say like with Ann Taylor, again, like we had corporate meetings that were like thousands and thousands of people big. Like our office was just like huge, like multiple floors in like a very tall high rise in the middle of Times Square. So you can imagine even the setting, like going from that to Santa Monica, and then also downtown LA, which was where Nasty Gal was, like both of them, palm trees everywhere. We would, walk across the street and go to lunch, whereas in Times Square, it was just going literally to next door to Chopped and grabbing your salad and being around millions of people on the street, to then in LA being around like nobody, because nobody walks in Los Angeles. But just from purely outside of even the setting, but to just like everything around the company, like there were so many more processes that were involved in Ann Taylor. Like we had actual systems that we used for like allocation and all of that. And then with Shoe Dazzle, we were just forming our first ever merchandising reports. We were just forming like our email cadence and our programs and our processes and all that. So again, things were just a lot more built out at Ann Taylor, but at the same time with Shoe Dazzle and Nasty Gal, we still had awesome systems. They were just a little bit more homegrown, but at the same time, I think that those homegrown systems allowed for you to learn even more efficiently versus everything being done for you at a company like Ann Taylor. So I think lots of differences, but at the same time, like I would say the biggest one is just like the size of the capacity of folks that you work with. And then even comparing, those smaller startups to companies like Pinterest and the Instagrams of the world, like navigating the org at larger companies is part of the job in and of itself, in comparison to when you're at a startup. You're not navigating the org so much. You're spending more time creating that processy. So that's definitely like a big difference.
Yeah, I can only imagine the change that must have been like, or even just like moving back to LA and then just being in a totally different type of company. So it's interesting to hear your perspective from that. But those are two incredible companies to get to work at, and to be in the fashion space just sounds like, again, a dream. And I know there's so many girls out there that would absolutely love to be on a similar career trajectory as you are working at those types of fashion companies. You were at Nasty Gal for about a year, and then you moved over to AdRoll, where you were a retail account executive for 3 years. Can you tell me about your transition there? Because then I think after that, you went over to Meta or Facebook.
Yeah, totally. So basically, after my time over at Nasty Gal, like again, going back to the idea of me really growing an affinity for the consumer and for like the cult-like brand, I really wanted to transition into a role that was more like client facing, because I realized a huge skill set of mine was being able to connect with people, talk with people, and like my personality was a huge asset of like what I brought to the table in a professional environment.
How
So
did you realize that? Or how did you come to that conclusion that I'm not getting what I need from this role and I need to switch?
honestly, it was just like it was really just every single day as I was like behind a computer screen, I started realizing like, God, I really want to like chat with people. I really want to meet with people. Like I want to be a little bit more interactive. And I think it was just something that like naturally started coming up as I started seeing, probably getting like a little frustrated in the role and not feeling as fulfilled. And then also like Nasty Gal was also facing lots of like kind of obstacles at the time, just from a growth perspective as well. And like, so I think it was a combination of things that I wanted to find a way that I could really play to my strengths in a bigger way. So moved my life back up to the Bay Area, again, where I'm originally from. I thought to myself at the time, you know what, like tech is booming. I think I want to figure out a way to get a little bit more involved in tech, make a pivot from pure play fashion, even though like Shoe Dazzle and Nasty Gal was e-commerce. So there was a tech component to it. I wanted to get even more involved in the tech space. I wanted to kind of have an angle to marketing, and I wanted to be able to like be in a sales role and work with clients and like, and live out that passion or that skill set of mine that I, thought I had. And I was exactly right in doing that. So I got hired over at AdRoll, which at the time was like a leading ad tech company. And the way that the platform was set up was that we housed both Facebook ads as well as display ads. So a smaller brand could come to AdRoll, have us run all of their advertising, and then they would be able to tackle both Facebook and Google in like one platform or one dashboard. And at the time, digital advertising was just getting started. It wasn't nearly as crowded or expensive as it is now. And so that really was like the only way that brands were getting their name out there into the ether. And so started, and then slowly, after kind of like working as an account executive for a few months, kind of managing a bunch of like variety of different verticals, like from like a fishing company to like my clients were like a fishing company to like a drink company to, like a pasta company. Like I think that really taught me that like, there's connectivity in like all brands, and everyone needs good creative. Everyone needs good like ads. Everyone needs certain things to really like touch the hearts and minds of their consumers to be able to get a conversion. And so because of my experience in the fashion and retail space, I got hired to sort of lead our beauty and fashion retail vertical as it related to like all of our advertisers. So that's kind of what propelled me into staying there for 3 years. And then coming out of that experience, I got poached by Meta. And so joined their luxury retail team within sales. And so my biggest client, or the book that I managed, was LVMH, and I managed our West Coast business, which encompassed of like Sephora, of Kat Von D, of like all these like makeup brands there. And I think what was really amazing about this was, again, AdRoll was a company that was like 200, 300 people. So same thing, like Shoe Dazzle, Nasty Gal, they barely got to that amount. But with Meta going there, it was such a big organization. So I think the biggest challenge that I had when I was making that transition was, wow, this org is so big. I don't know who to contact for who. All of our comms are done through Facebook groups. Like that was essentially like what we used to like learn about
Internally?
internally. Yeah, we used
Really?
Facebook groups that you looked at. And I think that for me was just such a big change. So again, like it was an amazing role because I got to work with, Sephora, which was like an enterprise leading retailer, got to launch an entirely new ad unit with them. But I would say like Facebook was or Meta was definitely like not my favorite place to work. I think my sweet spot really lies in that, in honestly, like the Pinterest lens as it relates to corporate, in that like kind of 2000 to maybe 5000 like sphere. I think Meta was just massive and huge. And I don't know, maybe I got kind of like lost in the shuffle of all of that. So I actually was only at Meta for a year. So Nasty was actually 2 years, but then Meta was one. And then after that, I actually really grew such an affinity towards the small, medium-sized business at my time at Instagram. Like we were doing so many things. I wasn't part of this team because, as I said, I was part of the Sephora team, but we were doing so many things for small businesses, and so many small businesses were starting to leverage and utilize Facebook ads to grow their business. And so when I was here, this really was like, oh my gosh, I would love to start my own small business, leverage Facebook ads to grow it, like see what I can do in that capacity. And so I kind of started like doing a little bit of research on how I could launch my own brand, which quite frankly took like quite some time to launch. Like I started thinking about it and wanting to do it in 2019, probably didn't put pen to paper until sometime in actually during the pandemic in 2020. And then in the pandemic of 2020, when I was working at Pinterest and trying to create this brand on the side, I I thought to myself, this is the pandemic. There are no distractions. If I'm going to launch this thing, this is the time to do it because the world is essentially shut down. So I don't have these distractions of going out with friends, like going out on dates, et cetera, et cetera. So that's exactly what I did. And I leveraged all of my contacts from the Nasty Gal days. My head buyer, who now is the founder of Lisa Says Ga, introduced me to my first pattern maker, who then just kind of spiraled. And I was able to then find my fabric supplier. I was able to like find someone to help me with my branding, and everything just kind of went from there. And then I was able to launch it in 2021 at the very end of the year. So
That's incredible, Namita. It's so funny because I also started Sky Society in the pandemic. So it's funny with how the pandemic changed things. Before we jump into your career journey over at starting your own business, I want to just rewind a little bit to talk about your role over at Facebook and AdRoll. I just am curious because I think those two positions were very different from your previous history, where you were working, directly with fashion brands, and you were in-house versus going and doing this like agency type of work where you're working with multiple different brands and then a totally different side of it. And then you kind of came out of it with this revelation that, okay, you have more clarity about what you wanted, right? Okay, I really thrive here in these mid-sized business and, this mid-sized space. And I know I really want to work with people like that. I feel more comfortable with that. So for someone who's going through their career, I feel like not a lot of people realize those things about themselves, or they don't really become aware. They may realize like, I'm not really happy here, but they don't maybe know why or what is the missing link. So do you have advice for kind of how to really figure out and trust like what is the right thing for you, or like where is the right space to be in your career, or taking risks, or how to learn, or kind of how to navigate that so you can learn more about yourself and what is right for you?
Yeah. No, that's such a great question. I think to me, like what I would say is the most important thing to figuring out what it is that you do want is to do things that show you what you don't want. Like, I think most often than not, like very rarely, which it does happen, but people jump into a career and it's something that they absolutely love and it's exactly what they always wanted and they just skyrocket from there. And that's so amazing for those people. And it's incredible. And kudos to them for like knowing themselves so well out the gate. But for those of us who are, you know, unsure and kind of trying to experiment and all this stuff, like I would say, whatever is feeling good to you at that moment in time, put your doubts aside and just do it. Even do it for like 6 months. See how you're feeling. Really try to like check in with yourself and like instead of feeling like you have to get the question right, understand like is this actually something that like I care about? Is there something of value that I can bring to this problem that we're trying to solve or to this company or whatever it is? I would say like more often than not too, it's like years will go by and you won't end up doing anything about that job that you're not that happy about, but you're okay with because life does have a multitude of distractions. And you know what? Like, that's okay. Like, I feel like that's normal. And sometimes it takes a certain incident, it takes a certain like bad meeting with like a manager or you meet someone at a dinner in which you're like, wow, I really love what that person is doing. Like, that's what I want to be doing. Or, you know, you just happen to like get so sick of your job and you're miserable that you're like, I absolutely need to figure out what it is that I want to do next. And you end up scouring LinkedIn to find people who fit that profile of maybe what it is that you want to do. And you kind of take the plunge from there. So I would say it's like so many different things that people kind of come across in their obstacles of like finding their perfect career. And there really is no perfect career. And I don't know, it lots of, I would say it's just lots of reflection, lots of kind of like doing things that you don't like. So that way it can show you, wow, I really hated that. So now I can cross that off the list and I can then go explore this next thing. So I would say like most people, like sometimes it can take them until they're 50 to find what they really love, but it's okay. And you just keep going. And I would say the biggest piece of advice that I have is to, while it's very hard, is to try to not compare yourself because when you compare yourself, I truly believe that comparison is the thief of joy. And when you compare yourself, you're only hurting yourself because your focus is on others and it's not on you. So just keep that focus on you, cut out the noise, and, you know, try your best because that's really all you can do.
I think that's really great advice. And especially for those of us, I think a lot of people can relate to not being happy with their job, but I think fewer people actually do something about it. And I see it all the time. People, you know, it's easy to complain, easy to say I'm not happy, it's easy to say, oh, my work's boring, but it's harder to ask yourself why. And it's harder, I think, to look inward and be like, okay, well, why is this not a good fit for me? Why am I not feeling happy? And even I struggle with it. You know, I go through phases within me building my own business where, you know, I have, you know, periods of times where I'm not feeling really happy about it. And the hard thing is to do that self-reflection and to actually change something, but it is always absolutely worth it. And taking that leap and, you know, like what you said too, is taking that leap and starting your own company. All of those things are really scary. And I think the closer we get to our dreams, I think the scarier that it really gets.
100%. And like, sorry, the last thing I'll also add is that I think a big reason why, at least this was how it was for me, that I didn't want to, that makes you hesitate to switch careers is the fact of your ego. Like when you switch careers, you kind of do have to start in an entry level position. So that way you can learn the nuts and bolts of that new career that it is that you are exploring. So I think knowing that, you know, careers aren't linear, it's okay to be in a role that maybe is like lower than the level that you would have thought. Like you just need to sort of, you know, like look past that and know that you will get to where it is that you want to be eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go into your brand, Humble & Co., I want to take a quick little pivot and I want to talk about your time at Pinterest because you were there for, I think, maybe the longest stint throughout your career, almost 4 years, and you did all things partnerships over at Pinterest. So I would love to hear just some of the highlights from your time over at Pinterest and some of the things you learned while working there.
Yeah. So yeah, Pinterest was definitely my most favorite job that I've had, or my most favorite, career experience. I just think that they're an amazing company, really care about their employees. They really care about mental health of their employees. And I think lots of their brand ethos very much aligns with who I am as a human. So I started off because of my experience in the D2C space when I was kind of like exploring lots of different brands like the Warby Parkers, the Allbirds, and the Rothys of the world. I was actually hired to join the Pinterest Disruptors team within brand partnerships. So this team was designated to helping these leading, mainly online driven businesses grow their presence on Pinterest and succeed. So my clients, again, ranged from the Warby Parkers, the Love Everys, the Allbirds, et cetera. And so it was figuring out ways to create really creative campaigns, not only with creative ads, but with creative targeting and creative, like lots of creative facets. Because the way you think about Pinterest is people come to Pinterest to plan life events. So for example, if someone is planning their wedding, like you want to make sure that in those planning phases, if you are doing advertising for a wedding brand, you're making sure that those ads are speaking to someone who's planning their wedding. Or maybe you can then have ads that speak to someone who's like, later on in their stage and their wedding is already planned and they're looking for their honeymoon. So like there's so many different ways and angles that Pinterest has just from like the way that the platform works that allowed for really creative campaign conception and really creative ways that you could reach your clients' goals and tap into the platform in unexpected facets. So I would say I did that for like a year and a half. And then I very much so wanted to move over to marketing. So they actually had a running joke at Pinterest that I should do a bunch of internal chats with folks because it is really hard to move orgs at companies because very rarely do roles open up and you really need to be diligent. So I found a way to get a coffee chat on the books with like pretty much so many folks from marketing. One particular woman, she was so sweet and she actually had someone internally at Pinterest help her make the switch to marketing. So she almost paid it forward to me. And so what was really lovely is she said to me, how about you do a 10% project with me, like in like the later half of, it was my second year on brand partnerships. And I was like, this sounds great. Got the approval from my manager, started working on our like biggest global marketing campaign internally as it related to, there was like a link from sales to marketing. And I was kind of like the missing link in between. So it was really great because I got to meet a bunch of folks on marketing through that. I was able to like navigate the marketing org, know who to go to for what, and get my feet wet. And then a role opened up, which was like perfect for me. And kind of honestly, I don't know if I'll ever find more of a dream role in corporate than that one. But I got hired to be our creator marketing lead specifically for partnerships, which meant coming to the table, like forming an entire strategy from scratch and coming at the table with goals, KPIs, ways we're going to measure, and also like really interesting partnerships that can help tell creator stories at scale in meaningful ways, but then also help increase Pinterest relevancy within the industry. So, through this entire year, I was able to do amazing partnerships with like MTV, the White House, Selena Gomez, as it related to like this huge mental health youth action forum. And we were really positioning Pinterest as the go-to mental health platform amongst all of the others. And, did partnerships that linked back to diversity and inclusion with Aurora James and the 15% pledge. And lastly, like did partnerships that, linked back to like our leading vertical, which was home and design and home. So did this whole like in real life experience activation at the show fields in Williamsburg. And like, I don't know, it was just such a dream because I got to kind of marry all of my experiences, my love for brands, my network, my analytic abilities to, get to those goals. And just kind of like my passion for people and meeting folks and doing that cold outreach to creating this whole sort of division or program at Pinterest. And so it was amazing. And I think I just learned so much. And again, it's just the constant navigation of white space that just makes you grow stronger and stronger.
It really does sound like that role married everything kind of throughout your career where you really did that internal, soul searching and really got to figure out what you liked and ended up getting a role that incorporate all of those things. And even the way that you got it is you kind of that same thing, taking back those cold outreaches, but doing it internally and setting up those coffee chats, I think is absolutely amazing. I've heard that advice before, that if you do want to move orgs within a big company like that, it does not happen easily. It's hard. And so I think what you're doing, going above and beyond and making those coffee chats. And I think sometimes people are afraid, or, are they going to say no, or what's going to happen? But it absolutely worked out in your favor for you putting yourself out there. And then I think your story also too is inspiring because it shows that your dream job, I feel like there's so much pressure. I work with so many girls that are young and they want their dream job immediately. And your job at Ann Taylor was for sure a dream. However, I think the more you learn about yourself, the more your dream job actually becomes your dream job, and you probably don't really even know what it is until later on. And then you've also got to pivot to then starting and building your own fashion company. So it may not have worked out exactly how you thought, but it is, I'm sure now walking me through it maybe gives you some hindsight of kind of how all the dots connected.
Of course, of course. And again, I strongly recommend to everyone who's kind of exploring their career journey to really lean in and embrace the idea of a career journey being not linear. You grow certain parts of strength by navigating the unknown. Uncertainty is one of the leading causes of anxiety. And if you can navigate that and find a way to conquer it at a young age and throughout the years, it'll just serve you better in the long term for your life. And so I'm a huge fan of the nonlinear journey. And I think it just leads to more opportunities, more learning about yourself, and just a fuller life in all the ways.
That's really beautiful. Okay, the last thing, Namita, that we need to wrap up here on is this new brand that you've started. So you've started your own fashion brand. Again, I'm sure a lot of people would love to do that someday. I also have a special place in my heart for fashion, and that sounds absolutely amazing. So we don't have time to go through every little detail. I know there's so much effort and work that you put into this, but I would love to learn kind of about what the key things that you have so far gotten from this opportunity, or what you have learned, or what does the struggles look like, or advice you have for someone who is potentially considering this as a career path for them.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say the first thing I learned, and I think you had mentioned this at the beginning of our call, was just you need to start. It doesn't even matter what starting looks like, whether starting is getting out a blank Google sheet and just writing down a business plan. That's what starting is. And so I think for me, again, this was during the pandemic, and I sort of had a vision of what I wanted it to do, or what I wanted the brand to be. Initially, I actually wanted it to be basics, which I ended up following through with, but now I'm kind of in a world of which I'm pivoting a bit. But I would initially wanted it to be basics, really high quality products. And I wanted a percentage of the sales to give back to a mental health foundation in India, because mental health is also something that I very, very much so. I'm incredibly passionate about, especially because mental health within the South Asian culture is deeply stigmatized. People don't like talking about it. And it's something that I feel we need to keep growing awareness for. So I would say just kind of having an idea. I think the biggest thing about starting something is trust yourself, and don't try to come up with your own idea first. You are the creator of this baby, of this passion project, of whatever it is that you're making. So I would say the most important thing is trusting your own vision, cutting out the noise. Even if you tell people about your idea, they don't agree, the only way you're going to get anywhere is just by doing what it is that you put your mind to and following through with what it is that you want to do. So honestly, in the beginning, I didn't even tell people that I was working on it. I was oh, I'm just doing my own thing. I'm just people would be oh, what did you do all day? During the pandemic, lots of people would watch Netflix all day, and I was working on this all day. And it's not like I was trying to hide it from anyone, but at the same time, certain things it's almost better sometimes to work in silence, especially if it's something that you're unsure of at the start of it. I just happened to get connected to a really amazing girl who is still a close friend of mine who does my branding. And I found ways to kind of launch this thing bootstrapped, putting my own money towards it. And, figured out what I wanted the site to look like, looked at lots of other brands, did lots of competitive market research. I, just decided I'm going to start with 4 tops, keep it simple, have 1 t-shirt, have 1 sweatshirt, have 1 long sleeve, and have 1 turtleneck. Just launch it, have one of the tops have South Asian influence, see how this goes. I ended up like doing an amazing pop-up that actually got the most amount of my sales, because when you do things in real life, they just sell so much better because people are able to touch and feel the fabrics and really immerse themselves in the brand. But I would say, like, I was also doing this entire thing on the side of Pinterest. And I think another piece of advice I have for someone is, if you really want a business to thrive and grow dramatically and really fast out the gate, make that your one and only thing. Because for me, I launched this brand in 2021, explored my dream job in 2022 at Pinterest. And then now I'm actually pivoting my brand to go from basics to have even more South Asian influence. And I just had a whole research meeting that I did in India this past week. So, I would say again, you have to have the trial and error. You have to be able to have the aptitude that pivoting is okay. Changing your mind is okay. And it's okay if things aren't a knock out of the park at the onset. Fashion is tough, and it takes a long time to build a following and to build a brand that people can create as their go-to. So I would say just, start, don't listen to anyone else, work in silence if you need, and just keep going.
Wow, Namita, hearing you share all of that is absolutely inspiring, I think, for all of us to hear, and to see you going after your dreams and actually making them happen is honestly so amazing to hear. And throughout this entire episode, you have shared such great advice, and it's just been a joy to hear about your career journey and your advice for women. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all of this with us. It has been so much fun chatting with you today.
Thank you so much.